cost of continuous rebuilding after every tropical cyclone and adapting to increasing sea level rise leaves little fiscal space for investment in the SDGs. Our global climate actions must focus on the root cause of climate change to break this cycle of costly and continuous rebuilding. The one obvious sustainable solution is to stop and reverse increasing global temperatures. To this end, the Kainaki 2 Declaration on Climate Change, endorsed by Pacific leaders in Tuvalu in 2019, calls for updated NTCs to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, a global climate finance target of $100 billion, and the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund to support urgent adaptation needs and an end to inefficient and harmful fossil fuel subsidies, including the phase out of coal. Mr. President, as we move closer to COP26, we make the same call on developed countries and major economies to demonstrate leadership. We need your commitment to fulfill the financial promises made in the Paris Agreement, including aligning global financial flows to be consistent with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. The recent IPCC report on climate warns that we are inching closer to the point of no return. COP26 will be a make or break COP. To our developed countries, major economies, and emerging economies, we urge you to use your leadership roles to make COP26 a success. Climate change is already restricting our capacity to achieve sustainable development goals. Mr. President, our United Nations has in place systems and processes to guide our efforts to build resilience and build back better. We have the various international frameworks stemming from the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Istanbul Plan of Actions for LDCs, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Paris Agreement. It is evident that we also have the sources and the technology that we need. We must strive for strong political commitment. Mr. President, I therefore urge you to work to build political commitment and development cooperation with developed countries and major economies, including emerging economies. Mr. President, revitalizing the United Nations is critical to responding to our increasingly complicated global challenge. In terms of climate change, we applaud the appointment of the UNSG Special Advisor on Climate Change. And we look forward to the streamlining of climate change and security in the work of various UN bodies to build a UN system that is responsive to the needs of those most vulnerable to climate change. COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerability of our food security systems. For Tuvalu, our food security and agricultural capacity is our bloodline. It is therefore paramount to keep our oceans clean and sustainable for our people and generations to come. We look forward to the implementation of the outcomes of the UN Food System Summit to complement and scale up our existing food security systems and program to adapt better to climate change and support progress on the SDGs. Mr. President, I thank you for the recognition that to build resilience, we must respect the rights of people, and the UN must be revitalized to uphold the rights of all people of the world. People it was established to serve and protect. On this very note, Tuvalu calls for the recognition of the rights of the people of Taiwan to the UN premises. The UN system was established to serve the public interest of all peoples. Having unhindered access to the family of nations should be a right for all, not a privilege for some. It is most regrettable to see the ongoing injustice of Taiwanese people being barred from accessing UN premises for visits and meetings simply because the UN fails to recognize Republic of China Taiwan passports, which are in fact accepted by almost every country in the world. Likewise, Taiwanese media outlets and journalists cannot obtain accreditation to cover UN meetings and events. It is alarming that civic space in the UN and freedom of the press are being restricted. It is also unjustifiable that a patient's access to UN premises now depends on nationality rather than on safety and security grounds. Granting Taiwanese passport holders access to UN premises is an essential step for the meaningful participation of Taiwan and the Taiwanese people in the UN system. It is also regrettable that the people of Cuba continue to face the economic burden of a long unilateral economic embargo. Keeping these measures in place has robbed Cuba of the international cooperation and assistance it has required to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and build back better. The embargo has ignored the principles of the Charter of the United Nations and neglected the human rights and the spirit of cooperation espoused in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. President, as you may realize, I have been talking mainly about climate change. This is not to diminish the importance of other global challenges which Tuvalu also continues to face. Rather, it is because, for us, climate change is the single greatest threat to the lives, prosperity, and human security of our people. It is an existential threat. Tuvalu is unable to build resilience with hope, as noted in the theme of the 76th session of the General Assembly, if climate change is allowed to continue on its current trajectory. Finally, Mr. President, Tuvalu reiterates its commitment to multilateralism through unity. The Tuvalu 2021 Independence Day theme, Unity in Words and Deed, is a message I bring as a call to all members of the United Nations to embrace our shared differences and unite in action to address climate change and its impacts on humankind. Working together as the global family of the United Nations with the full respect for human rights and the needs of the planet, together we can build a sustainable future for planet Earth. I thank you, Mr. President. Tuvalu Modelo.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Tuvalu for the statement just made. I now give the floor to the representative of Antigua and Barbuda to introduce the statement by the head of government.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my honor and a distinct privilege to introduce a pre-recorded version of the National Statement of Antigua and Barbuda to be presented by the Right Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Minister of Corporate Governance, the Right Honorable Gaston Alfonso Brown, Prime Minister. I thank you.
Mr. President, the Secretary General, distinguished heads, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election to the presidency of this 76th session of the General Assembly. Antigua and Barbuda assures you of our fullest cooperation as you steer our collective work in what will be a challenging year. Mr. President, I agree wholeheartedly with Secretary General Antonio Guterres that the international community is failing to deliver policies to support peace, global health, the viability of our planet, and other pressing needs. I also agree with him that the lack of a global response and a vaccination program to end the COVID-19 pandemic is a clear and tragic example of such failure. If developed countries had acted in a manner that allowed for the proper access to vaccines and medical supplies at the onset of the pandemic, globally, we would all be in a better place. Developing countries were not seeking handouts.